All right, so today we're going to take a look at thinking, problem solving, and language. All right, first of all, thinking is defined as, thinking or cognition refers to the process that involves knowing, understanding, remembering, and also being able to communicate information. You can break your thinking down into concepts when you're thinking about specific things. Concepts are mental grouping of similar objects, events, ideas, or people. So basically, concepts are how you file things away in the filing system in your brain. They're filed away based on concepts. For example, there are a variety of chairs, all right, but their common features are what defines the concept of a chair. So what are some common features that you see here in all three of these chairs? All right, they all have a seat, they all have a back, they all have legs or base. So when you put all of those common features together, it forms the concept of a chair. Now you develop these concepts. You form some concepts by definition. So for example, down here, a triangle, has three sides. All right, so you've defined what a triangle is based on its definition. But for the most part, you'll actually define concepts by some type of mental picture or prototype. Make sure you get that vocabulary word down. Prototype is defining concept based on mental pictures. So for example, if I were to say, think of a bird, odds are, let's say a robin or some type of bird that looks like this would be what comes to mind. A penguin or an ostrich wouldn't necessarily come to mind. Even though they're both birds, they're not the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of bird. Concepts tend to be mentally represented as schemas or generalizations developed about categories of objects, events, and people. The schemas that you have help you to understand what a concept is and will often cause you to generate expectations about what that concept does as well. So for example, a police officer. What is your prototype or the mental picture that comes to your mind when you close your eyes and you think of a police officer? So picture a police officer in your mind. What common features do all police officers have? All right, so that mental picture in your mind that you're thinking of all police officers, what does every police officer have that's coming to your mind? All right, probably like a uniform, a badge, things like that. As you develop a schema of the police officer, so your mental picture or your generalization, you also start to develop these expectations. So you expect a police officer to be wearing that uniform, wearing the badge, help people in need, things like that. All right, this brings us to problem solving. All right, all of this is going to tie together in a little bit. All right, problem solving. There are three different ways that you solve problems. You'll need to know all three. All right, algorithms, heuristics, and insight. To start off, algorithms are a methodical or logical rule or procedure that generates problem solving for a particular problem. So we think algorithms, generally we think of math, but in this case, not necessarily. It's just a particular solution to a particular problem. It's where you exhaust all possibilities before you arrive at a solution. Algorithms take a long time. Computers use algorithms, you use them in math. Well, a good example of an algorithm is, if you look here, finding oatmeal in a grocery store. Using an algorithm, you would search every aisle until you find the oatmeal. All right, so you're exhausting all possibilities until you arrive at your solution. Does it take a long time? Yes. But does it guarantee that you'll find the oatmeal? Yes, because you've exhausted all other possibilities of places that it could be. But again, it took you a while because you went through every single aisle in the grocery store. Heuristics are a simpler way of, it's a simple thinking strategy that often allows you to make judgments and problem solve efficiently. It enhances the likelihood of success, but it doesn't assure it. So where algorithms are longer, heuristics are the shorter, speedier way to solve a problem. However, it is more prone to error than algorithms. So going back to the oatmeal example, finding the oatmeal. So now you're going to use the signs at the end of each grocery aisle to find the oatmeal. So you're going to look for the breakfast or cereal category aisle, and you'll look in that aisle first. Now, is it a speedier way of getting to the oatmeal if it is there? Yes, but does it guarantee that the oatmeal is necessarily there? No, because it could be somewhere else. Depending on the grocery store, it depends on where they put it. All right, so it is prone to error. An insight is what involves a sudden new realization of a solution to a problem. When you'll often need some prior experience and initial trial and error period to gain some insight. Humans and animals have it. Basically, insight is that aha moment in the brain where you realize that you've done something similar before that helps you to solve a new problem. Right? It's that light bulb going on in your brain. And actually, brain imaging and EEG suggests that when an insight strikes, when that aha moment strikes, it will actually activate your right temporal lobe, which tells us that the time between not knowing a solution to knowing a solution using insight is about 0.3 seconds. So interesting fact. All right, so now we've looked at the 3 ways that you do problem solve. Now let's look at some obstacles with those. The first obstacle you're going to hit is something called fixation. It's an inability to see a problem from a fresh perspective. All right, make sure you're getting these in your notes. Fixation. 2 types of fixations are mental set and functional fixedness. Mental set is your tendency for an old pattern of problem solving to persist and make it impossible for you to see a new way of problem solving. For example, automatic doors. Let's say you're going into Target and the doors are automatic. You expect them to open. All right, let's say the doors aren't automatic and you pause there and you're just waiting for the door to open. Rather than just pushing on the door, pulling on the door, you stand there and wait, or you jump up and down. That would be an example of mental set, right? Because what you're expecting the doors to do is getting in your way of actually solving the problem and just going and opening the door yourself. Because you're expecting it to do something already, and you just, for whatever reason, you can't get around that to think of the new way to do it. Functional fixedness is your tendency to think of the only familiar functions for an object. So for example, look at the different ways you can use a fork. All right. Generally, we think of a fork as being able to eat food with. All right. Now, if you have functional fixedness, it means that that's the only possible thing you could see using a fork for. You can't see the possibility in a fork being, a brush. All right. Ariel didn't have functional fixedness, all right, because she was like, oh, I can use this as a brush. But if you can only see the one possibility is that one thing, that's what it's used for, then you have functional fixedness and you can't get away out of it. You want to think out of the box. Functional fixedness is you can't think outside of the box. Confirmation bias, we've talked about this in a previous unit, the tendency to search for information that confirms your personal bias. It's where you seek evidence to support ideas and tend to dismiss evidence that's contrary to your way of thinking. So think about whenever you've written a persuasive essay or something like that in English class. Odds are, all right, be honest, odds are when you were looking for evidence to support your claim, you were only looking for evidence that supported your side. All right, that's confirmation bias. When it comes to relationships, perhaps there's evidence there of your significant other cheating on you, and you're choosing to overlook it and look at all the other information. All right, you're looking at what you want to see to prove what you think and not looking at the rest of it. You could also misuse heuristics. That gets in your way. There are 2 kinds of heuristics, so thinking back to different ways we problem solve. There's 2 types of heuristics that have been identified by cognitive psychologists, and they are representative and availability heuristics. Make sure you get this down. While they help us to problem solve, they can also contribute to bias as well. And this also goes to why heuristics are not exactly foolproof and why they can be error prone when it comes to solving problems. Representative heuristics are where you're judging the likelihood of things or objects in terms of how well they seem to represent or match your particular prototype. This allows people to make quick judgments. So for example, An example of representative heuristics. If you meet a man that was dressed in slacks, a nice sweater, he was like smaller in height, very soft-spoken and shy. If you had the options between guessing his career as being a librarian or a construction worker, which one would you think? Based on your heuristics and your prototype, based on your prototype of him, you would think, oh, well, he's probably a librarian. But you could be wrong. All right, because he probably fits that prototype, that schema that you have of a librarian a little bit better than he does of a construction worker. But again, you may be wrong. He could be a construction worker. All right, another example I have here is a picture of Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. All right, what was a prototype that people had of Elle Woods? Right, of being this dumb blonde. And were they right? No, she wound up being like graduating first in her class. All right, so it can get in your way and actually cause problems for you when it comes to problem solving. Availability heuristics is a cognitive shortcut in which probability of an event is determined by how easily the event can be brought to mind. So you choose the alternative that is mentally available. So for example, if you imagine, so like dying in an airplane versus dying in a car crash, right? You're more afraid of dying in an airplane due to the fact that that gets overwhelmingly like more publicity when that does happen. And so that image is more readily available to you because you see that example more, despite evidence to the contrary that car crashes happen more frequently than plane crashes. All right, another example I have here is people freaking out over Ebola. Oh my God, I'm going to get Ebola and die. And they're so focused on that when really that's not that big of a thing here. All these other things could easily make you sick and kill you, like have a higher likelihood, but your availability heuristic goes to Ebola first. Overconfidence, we've talked about this in a prior unit as well. Your tendency to overestimate the accuracy of your beliefs and your judgments. Overconfidence is not necessarily a bad thing, all right? Usually we associate it with happiness. It's what makes us do things to begin with. We feel overly confident that we can do something. It motivates us, and it keeps us from worrying. However, it may also make us prone to things like procrastinating and not putting our full effort in because we're making assumptions that we're good at this. Exaggerated fear opposed to overconfidence is more negative. You see it as more like it's fear-based, whereas overconfidence is more based around happiness. Your fears may be ill-founded. With exaggerated fear, for example, 9/11 led to a decline in air travel due to fear. People were afraid of being involved in a hijacking and being crashed into two buildings. Now, their fear was founded, but odds of it happening again right after that were, very slim. Framing decisions is how an issue is presented can significantly affect your decisions and judgments as well. So the more positive you make something sound, the better people are going to respond to that, and vice versa. The more negative you make something sound, the more negative people are going to respond to that. For example, the best way to talk to somebody about surgery. Would you say to somebody, oh, this has a 90% success rate? Or would you say this has a 10% rate of failure? Which one would you present to a patient if you were a doctor? Odds are you'd say 90% success rate because you want to portray it in a positive light. You want them to feel positive about it. You want them to have that surgery. All right, you don't want to think about it in the negative. So it depends on how things are presented to you. That can also affect your decision making. Belief bias and belief preservance. All right. Make sure you know the difference between the two of these. Okay, so take notes. Belief bias is a tendency for one's pre-existing beliefs to distort logical reasoning, and this can sometimes bring you to invalid conclusions. So invalid conclusions, you make them just so that you could stay with your previous existing beliefs. So this kind of goes along with confirmation bias, is that you have your mind made up and you're only going to believe things that go along with that. So you're going to come to invalid conclusions, things that don't make sense, that are not, like, they're not true, just so you could stick with what you believe. Belief perseverance is a tendency to cling to our beliefs in the face of contrary evidence. You've been presented with contrary evidence and you still believe what you want to believe. Put a star next to this. This is different from confirmation bias because the information is presented to you and your belief still persists. Whereas confirmation bias, you're looking for evidence that only supports your belief. You're not looking for contrary evidence. Okay. Now let's move into language, because thinking and language really do go hand in hand. Language is our spoken, written, or gestured word, the way we communicate meaning of things to ourselves and to others. Language, let me break down the language structure for you. First, you have phonemes, so think like a phone, phonemes. This is the small distinctive sound unit in a spoken language. For example, bat has 3 phonemes, b, at. Chat has 3 phonemes as well, ch, at. All right, you're not saying hat, you're saying ch, hat. All right, so those are phonemes. So you break it down by basic units of sound. You also have morphemes, not morphine, all right, not the drug, morphemes. So there's an M. It's the smallest unit that carries meaning. It may be a word or a part of a word. So for example, milk, the smallest, the morpheme in that is milk. That's it. Pumpkin has 2 morphemes, pump and kin. Now, pump has meaning on its own, and kin has meaning on its own. Kin meaning like family members. All right, you put them together to form the word pumpkin. It has a totally different meaning, but you still, when you break down those 2 parts of the word, they both have their own individual meaning. Unforgettable. Unforgettable has 4 morphemes. Un, meaning to undo or take back. For, get, and table. So when you break the word down, they have 4 separate words that have different meanings. All right, so to break this down, copy this chart down. All right, phonemes are your basic sound. Morphemes are the smallest meaningful units of words. Words, it's now a meaningful unit altogether. Phrase is composed of 2 or more words, and a sentence is something that contains many words, so it goes beyond just a simple phrase. Okay. Grammar. All right. Grammar is a system of rules in a language that enables us to communicate and understand each other. All right. Grammar is made up of 2 concepts, syntax and semantics. All right. So make sure you get these 2 things down. I'm about to define each one of them. We're going to do semantics first, actually. Semantics is a set of rules by which we derive meaning from morphemes, words, and from sentences. So, for example, adding ed to the word laugh means that it happened in the past tense. All right, so we've added meaning to the word ed. We know it happened in the past. And this is in English. I mean, every language has their own form of semantics. In order to make something meaningful, they have to add like these set of rules. All right. Syntax is rules for combining words into grammatically sensible sentences. So for example, in English, in the English language, adjectives will come before nouns. All right. So for example, White House. Now in Spanish, it would be the other way around. All right, they do it, adjective comes after. All right, so every language has their own semantics, something that makes words meaningful, that determines past, future, present tense, things like that. And every language also has its own syntax, a way to combine words so grammatically they make sense in a sentence. Language development with children. All right, children learn their native languages before they learn to add. So before you learn to do anything with math, you'll actually learn your native language. You learn on average after you're 1 year old, okay? You learn on average about 3,500 words a year, which by the time you add that up, in your vocabulary, when you graduate high school, you should have about 60,000 words in your vocabulary that you can speak. Okay, so the next part of things that I'm going to talk about, if you're interested in working with little kids, all right, you will find this of particular interest to you. All right. When do we learn language? Well, first there's something called the babbling stage. This begins at around 4 months. This is where infants make their various sounds like ooh, ee, ah, and, just noises. At that age, they are not imitating adult speech yet. They're not, oh, look, they're trying to say this. No, they're not. They're not trying to say anything until they're about 9 to 10 months. All right, they're just making noises. And also, a baby before they're 1 year old, at the babbling stage, you really can't differentiate what their native language is. You can't tell if they're a Spanish speaking baby or an English speaking baby or what, because they're just babbling. It's just guttural noises that they're putting together. Then they reach the one-word stage, which is beginning at or around the first birthday, where they start to speak one words to make a family member understand them. So for example, a baby, when they say doggy, all right, they're just saying one word, but you know that that word has a meaning. It could mean look at the doggy over there. This usually begins with short words that begin with consonants like B, D, M, P, or T, which is why they're able to say like dada or mama or things like that. Those are generally like their first words because words with consonants come first. It's just easier for them to say. However, children are able to understand quite a bit of language. So they can understand you saying sentences, they just can't communicate in sentences yet. So you can, by the time a child is like around 1 year old, start talking to them like a normal person because they can understand you. All right. Don't talk to them in broken sentences or anything like that. Speak to them in full sentences. They understand you. They just can't quite say it back the same way yet. They're not quite there, but they know exactly what you're saying. All right. At the 2 year stage, before the second year, a child starts to speak in two-word sentences. They also call this telegraphic speech because just in the olden days when you used to send a telegraph, it was kind of like text messaging today, where you shorten things. You leave out like the words in, and, at, it, like those words. So for example, go car means I would like to go for a ride in the car. You know what they mean, right? But again, the vocabulary is smaller. Then they have the next phase is longer phrases, where they're saying longer phrases like "mommy get ball." It has syntactical sense, and by early elementary school, they're actually enjoying humor, right? Because now they've been able to put things together in a way that has semantics and syntax, and they can start to understand certain types of humor now. So explaining language development, get this down, B.F. Skinner, he says that he believed that we learn through operant conditioning, that language development can be explained all on the basic principles of operant conditioning using associations, imitations, and reinforcements, right? So you learn to speak because, yay, your parents are clapping and they're very happy and they give you rewards for speaking, so you're going to continue to do it and get better at it. You're imitating what you see, and you're making associations. You're connecting words to the objects that they go with. So all these things of operant conditioning. He also says children learn to speak because they're, again, going back to being rewarded for making sounds that are close to adult speech, and you continue to reinforce that behavior and shape it until they form correct words and correct sentences. Chomsky, this guy opposed Skinner's ideas, so he didn't agree with him. He suggested that the rate of language acquisition is so fast that there's no way it can be explained through operant conditioning. It has to be something that you're born with. You have to know how to do this. This is supported with the idea that language does have universal grammar. So it's almost like how can we explain it away through operant conditioning entirely, because every language does have those rules of semantics and syntax. So that must be ingrained in us somewhere for every language to have that. And he believes that part of the brain that understands language is actually switched on by exposure to language in our environment, and he called this the learning acquisition device. Make sure you get that. Statistical learning and critical periods. Well before your first birthday, your brains are actually determining words where they break up by statistically analyzing which syllables go together. So you're actually learning to form words based on breakup of syllables. So that way you see a sentence and you're basically, your brain is chunking it into syllables to figure out what's words. Learned during critical periods of childhood development. If a child does not learn their native language within their first critical period, so within the first few years of life, they will not be able to learn a language. So think about when we talked about a child getting a cochlear implant when they're little to fix their hearing. You want to do that at a young age, because if they miss that critical period where they have to hear sounds and learn languages, they will never really fully be able to develop the same understanding and those semantical and syntactical grammar rules that go along with language that other children would have. They've completely missed that, so you've got to take care of it quick. Language influences thinking. Ben Worf was he said linguistic determinism, also called linguistic relativity hypothesis, says that language determines the way that we think and perceive the world. All right. So, for example, the Hopi tribe, or the Hopi tribe of Native Americans, did not have a past tense for verbs. All right. So they couldn't think readily about the past. So if you think about it, that's actually kind of neat. They were always thinking in the moment. They couldn't think about the past because they had no past tense. They couldn't describe anything that happened in the past. Right? So that was an example of language determining the way they perceive the world. It's always in the present. When language provides words for objects or events, we can think about those objects more clearly and retain them. All right, so for example, it's easier to think about two colors with two different names than it is to think about colors of the same name. So for example, all of these are different types of blue, right? But it's actually hard to grasp what they are clearly if you just call them all blue. All right, we know some of these are dark blue, royal blue, aqua, robin's egg blue, baby blue, skylight. All right, it's a lot easier to get meaning and help to influence our thinking if we give them all different names as opposed to just calling them all blue. Thinking and images. Thinking is language-based. That's why, for example, we talk to ourselves when we're, home alone. It's just it's what we do. All right, we're all probably guilty of it, I'm sure. However, you also think a lot in images. So, for example, when you close your eyes and you think about riding a bike, odds are you're not thinking about saying, oh, and I push the pedals around and I hold the handlebars. No, you're actually probably picturing yourself riding the bike, and that's how you're thinking about that. You're not actually talking to yourself about it. All right, so a lot of thinking isn't linked to languages, but a lot of it is actually linked to images and picturing yourself doing it. An interesting fact, did you know that imagining a physical activity will activate the same regions of the brain for when you're actually performing that activity? So it actually seems like in the brain, when you're thinking about riding the bike and when you're actually riding the bike, the same exact, the same exact parts of the brain are lit up. This is why most psychologists believe that it's probably our thoughts that influence our language, not the other way around. Most psychologists believe that our thoughts influence our language because they go hand in hand, and we have brain scans to prove it. All right, so that's it. Sorry again, this video took so long. I'm trying to cram everything in before your final exams. I hope that you understood everything. If not, please go back and watch the video, look at your notes, and I will be posting the next quiz to Edmodo as soon as I'm done uploading this video. All right, good luck.